generation approaches leadership differently? Let's take a look. Boomers, their summary of leadership is authoritative. Gen X is hierarchy. Millennials, coaching. Gen Z, networked. We can talk about that networked approach in the Q&A. Boomers are in the sage stage where they're sharing their time-tested wisdom. Gen X are Sherpas. They've been to the top of the leadership mountain. They're now coming back down to rise up the next generation. Millennials are soldiers. Gen Z are students. I don't want to step on my lines here. So millennials are soldiers. So they're in the trenches as leaders. They're trying to figure out how do they best lead. They're sharpening their leadership skills. And then Gen Z are students. They're trying to learn, should I lead? And if I do, how best might I lead? And then their attitude around feedback specifically. Boomers, no news is good news. Gen X want semi-annual reviews. Millennials want routine check-ins. Gen Z want 360-degree real-time feedback. So back to this idea of centralized information versus decentralized information. So again, in the past, we would go to a central source for information, but today we go to our mobile devices. Information is now decentralized. So that changes leadership, because in the past, when there was a central source of information, that caused us to look up in organizations, right? We looked up to the individuals, the leaders that had the information. But now, since information is decentralized, that's no longer relevant. And now we have folks that you are leading that aren't looking to you or up in the organization or the agency for information. They're looking out. They're looking to subject matter experts that are throughout the world. And so it changes how you lead. No longer is there this really top-down approach all that effective. Now it's more of a networked approach. It's more of a coaching is what we found. That coaching is the #1 leadership style effectively for influencing across generations, because you have folks that are actually info gathering, they're learning, they're gaining resources, and they need someone to come up alongside them to help them navigate what they're learning. Because again, as a leader, we don't have all the information. So being a coach to try to draw out the information or encourage them of what the information they might need to seek can be really important. So the strategy I want you to consider is to be a guide on the side. No longer be a sage on the stage. No longer do you have all the answers. So instead, be a guide on the side. So coach your team through their learnings, their failures, their successes. And some of you are wondering, well, what's a coach? How do I best coach? But here's the best way to define coaching, and that is resist advice giving and you ask more questions. Resist advice giving and you ask more questions. This is very simple, isn't it? But it's hard to do, because what happens when you're in a leadership role and you see someone is heading for a cliff, you want to interject and you want to try to steer them away from that cliff. But if we're constantly coming to the aid and constantly resisting that advice giving, then there's no learning, there's no growth that's happening. And so resist advice giving and ask those right questions. And asking the right questions, that's hard work, right? Finding the right questions to ask. Well, we've simplified it for you. Here's some questions to consider. #1 is what's on your mind, because too often there's just so much going on, and we ask leading questions. So this is oftentimes a good place to start when you're in a coaching session. What's on your mind, and what else? Researchers call these two questions, it allows individuals to take an emotional breath where they're just kind of getting things off their mind and off their chest, thinking, I'm not quite sure where I need some help, but these are the things that are going on my team or in my specific role. Here it all is. And then asking, well, what's the real challenge here for you? You're trying to help them then come to the crux of it. How can I help you? Right? Trying to get very specific on how you can serve them as a leader. And then last but not least, what was most valuable or useful here for you? That's a really helpful question, because you're going to have that person leaving that conversation saying, gosh, that was a really helpful conversation. The next time I run into a snag, I'm going to go talk to my leader, and I'm going to be able to get some coaching, and I'm going to be able to figure out the answer myself, and I'm going to ultimately become a more independent and productive individual.